As new COVID variants emerge around the world, governments change tact, desperately hoping to protect already creaking health services. Today, the head of NHS England said the health service had never been in such a precarious situation.
Since Christmas Day, we've seen another 15,000 increase in the inpatients in hospitals across England. That's the equivalent of filling 30 hospitals full of coronavirus patients. And staggeringly, every 30 seconds across England, another patient is being admitted to hospital with coronavirus.
200 defence medics from the Army will begin helping in 5 London hospitals tomorrow to try and ease the pressure of growing patient numbers and staff absences. Ambulance staff in London are already being assisted by police and fire officers to free up capacity. In a survey for the GMB union, 3 out of 4 ambulance staff in England said they were at breaking point, suffering low morale and calling for better protective equipment.
It's a paper mask. It's the same thing that you would wear to Tesco's, and it's just disappointing that 10 months, nearly a year down the line, the government still aren't able to provide our trusts with the PPE to make us feel safe. A couple of weeks ago, I was 3 hours waiting in an ambulance for a bed for a patient who was COVID positive. And it was really difficult because you're sort of stuck in that environment. And knowing that exposure, it's quite difficult to then go home and just sort of carry on. We're all quite emotional a lot of the time, to be honest. Quite often when I come into work, there's, colleagues and friends crying just because they're just scared and tired and exhausted. And I really do fear for the mental health problems that are going to come after this wave.
Images of some of the world's best tennis players practicing in their hotel rooms ahead of the Australian Open showed how stricter the countries are being with international arrivals. They've enforced strict hotel quarantine for visitors since early last year. The government here today refusing to rule out doing the same soon.
Well, we've said we'd keep all the potential measures under review. I think there is a challenge in its workability, its deliverability, but we need to look at that very carefully, all right, based on the experience of other countries.
The Prime Minister today said they're averaging 140 vaccines a minute. Not yet enough to pledge to vaccinate everyone before September, but the Foreign Secretary said that by spring, 99% of those most at risk from dying of COVID will have had their first jab. And so begins the hopeful return of a bit of normality.
Well, earlier I spoke to the MP Tom Tugendhat, who's chair of Parliament's Foreign Affairs Select Committee and heads the China Research Group of Conservative MPs. I asked him first about the impact here of an Australian-style strict quarantine system.
Well, this is going to have a real impact on many people's lives, and anybody who's got friends who've been to Australia or has families in Australia or New Zealand knows the impact that this has had. So this is something that I'm glad the government has taken with very extreme caution.
The thing is, once you accept the principle that it's right to absolutely isolate people because of the spread around the world, until the whole world has got some protection, you can't lift it, can you?
Well, look, that's right. And that's why I'm absolutely clear that many other aspects of the government's powder keg need to be used, including aid spending to make sure that we spread out quite a lot of these vaccines as soon as we can. And we share as much of this technology.
This will kill stone dead the travel industry, won't it? It'll have massive economic impact that could last, right until the end of this year, potentially. Does the government need to do something more to alleviate that?
This is costing people an awful lot of money. It means that a stay in a hotel can be, in Australia, it can be a few $1,000s. Now, if you add that onto the cost of a flight and the cost of tests and all the rest of it, you're talking multiples of what it used to cost to fly in and out of Australia. And I suspect that's going to have a very severe impact on the travel industry around the world. So, yeah, we're going to have to look at how we support those companies.
Can I ask you on a separate matter, but obviously related? Mike Pompeo has sort of given a sort of a parting shot at China with his suggestion that there's a lot more we don't know about the Wuhan virus lab and hinting that maybe that was the real source of the virus. The WHO are going into China at long last. What hope do you have that they will actually get to the bottom of this?
Well, I've got to be honest, pretty limited. What we've seen from the very beginning, from November 2019, in fact, right the way through the early periods of 2020, we've seen secrecy. But it does look like the WHO's interest in Wuhan and the United States government's recent announcement appears to indicate that it's very likely that this is the original origin.
So you think the lab is likely to be the origin then and needs to be focused on? Because at the moment they're not going there.
Well, this is where all the indications start, and certainly the United States government has said that. I have no other knowledge than what has been made public to everybody else, but that appears to be an area of serious interest.
I mean, the trouble is, you talk about dictatorships and all the rest of it sort of stifling the truth. I mean, nobody has any moral high ground on this anymore, do they?
Well, I think that's a little unfair, actually, Christian. And I think if you look at the government from which Mike Pompeo comes from, they haven't locked up or detained any of the scientists. They haven't insisted on...
But they've lied left, right and centre.
Well, they may have done, but they haven't stopped others telling the truth. And the Chinese government has stopped others telling the truth. And that's the fundamental difference. Whatever happens in Washington doesn't decide what happens in labs across the United States. What does happen in Beijing decides exactly what happens in labs across China. What we have got into is an era in which some scientists are able to call out the truth, whereas in China, sadly, we saw them being arrested, we saw them being forced to recant in public in a sort of Stalinist show trial kind of way. We're seeing a very different kind of government, and that's really challenging.
Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much.
Thank you.